My parents wanted to rekindle their relationship. When I arrived, the whole family was already celebrating. Steaks. Seafood. Dad said, "You're paying for this, right?" I smiled and called the waiter. The next few minutes were unforgettable. My father called me after 5 years of silence and said 4 words that told me everything I needed to know about why he'd called. "We should have dinner." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I miss you." Dinner. Like we'd just been busy. "My name is Darlene and I want to tell you what happened the night my family tried to use me as their personal ATM, and how 15 years of restaurant work gave me the most satisfying response I've ever delivered in my life. Because trust me what I whispered to that waiter. Nobody at that table saw it coming. But let me back up. 5 years of nothing. No birthday calls. No texts. No "Hey, are you alive out there?" 5 years. And then suddenly my father Gerald's name lights up my phone on a random Tuesday night like nothing ever happened. Like time had just paused. You know what I did the first time it rang? I stared at it until it stopped. Then it rang again. And I, against every instinct I had, picked up. Gerald has this voice. Deep, smooth, the kind of voice that could sell you a car you don't need and make you feel good about it afterward. "Darlene," he said, "your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking. We want to make things right." My mother Patrice got on the line too and cried just enough. She's always known exactly how many tears to use. "We just want our daughter back," she said. Do you think I believed them? Honestly? Part of me did. That's the part I'm still a little embarrassed about. My therapist Sandra had been preparing me for exactly this kind of call for 2 years. When I told her about it the next morning, she did that thing where she tilts her head and just looks at you until you answer your own question. "What are you hoping for, Darlene?" I said I didn't know. She said, "Yes you do." And she was right, I was hoping for a real apology. The kind without a but attached to it. My cousin Reese, the one person in my family who has always been completely, almost aggressively honest with me, called me that same evening. First thing she said, "It's a trap." I laughed. He didn't. "Darlene, I'm serious. Don't go without a plan." I told her it was just dinner. She said, "Nothing with your parents is ever just anything." He was right. She is annoyingly, consistently right. The restaurant they picked was called Harrow and Stone. One of those downtown Chicago places where the lighting is low and the menu has no prices because if you're asking you probably shouldn't be there. Fine. I dressed up. I drove 40 minutes. I paid for parking. I walked in telling myself, stay calm, stay open, give them a chance. And then I saw the table. Not the quiet family booth Gerald had described. Not 4 people having a heartfelt conversation. I'm talking about a long banquet table with 20 people already seated. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, my brother-in-law's family somehow, people I didn't even recognize. Wagyu steak. Lobster. What looked like every appetizer on the menu. And right in front of my father, a bottle of wine already half empty, that I would find out later cost close to $1,000. Before I even sat down. Every head turned when I walked in. And Gerald, smiling like a man who just pulled off something clever, looked right at me and said, "You're paying for this, right? You owe us that much." A few people laughed nervously. My mother smiled into her glass. 3 seconds. That's how long I stood there. Then I sat down, picked up the menu and smiled back. Because here's what nobody at that table knew about me, what they'd never bothered to find out in 15 years. I had spent my entire adult life in the restaurant industry. Bussing tables at 19. Working every position up the ladder. Managing kitchens. Consulting. And for the last 4 years, planning private events for high-end venues across Illinois. I knew exactly how a place like Harrow and Stone worked. I caught the eye of our server, a young guy named Theo who was already looking at our table like he'd seen this kind of evening before, and I excused myself politely from the table. I didn't go to the restroom. I went to find the manager. And what I said in the next 60 seconds is going to make you either laugh, cringe, or both, because even I couldn't believe I was doing it while I was doing it. I walked back to that table and sat down like nothing had happened. And honestly, nobody even noticed I'd been gone. That tells you everything. My Aunt Ruthen was halfway through her second lobster tail. My cousin Derek's wife had ordered a cheese plate on top of a charcuterie board. Because why not, right? Uncle Roy, the man who once told me I was too sensitive for this family, was cutting into a Wagyu steak. And my father was pouring himself another glass from that bottle. Do you know what that bottle cost? $980. I checked the menu while everyone was busy talking about nothing. Meanwhile, I had ordered a glass of water and the roasted chicken. My phone buzzed under the table. It was my cousin Reese, the one person in my family who had been texting me, "Don't go," for 3 days straight before this dinner. "How bad is it?" I typed back exactly like you said. Her response was instant. "I'm outside. Say the word." See, Reese and I had talked the night before. Not about anything dramatic, just that I wasn't walking in there completely blind. She knew me well enough to know that if things went sideways, I might need a friendly face nearby. So she'd driven downtown and parked 2 blocks away just in case. That's what real family looks like, by the way. Just saying. Back at the table, my mother kept touching my arm and saying, "We've missed you so much," while not once addressing what my father had said when I walked in. In my family, harmful things are always delivered with a smile, and if you flinch, you're the problem. You're dramatic. You can't take a joke. I had been too sensitive my entire life. Then my father stood up and tapped his glass. He gave a speech. About family. About blood being thicker than water. About how tonight was about reconnecting. He said my name once, smiled at me like I was a guest star in his show, and raised his glass. To Darlene, who's always come through for this family. 20 people raised their glasses. I raised my water and smiled so wide my face hurt. Because somewhere in the back of that restaurant, the manager Curtis, calm, professional Curtis, who I'd had a very quiet and very specific conversation with 30 minutes earlier, was preparing 20 separate, fully itemized checks. Not one bill split evenly. 20 individual bills. Every person paying for exactly what they had personally ordered. Mine. $34 chicken. Glass of water. I want you to picture the moment those little black folders hit the table. Picture my Aunt Ruthan's face when she opened hers. Picture Uncle Roy doing the math on that steak. That moment was about 60 seconds away. And I have to tell you, I almost felt bad. Almost. The folders landed. And the table went quiet in that specific way that only happens when 20 people receive unexpected news simultaneously. Ruthan opened hers first. I watched her face go from relaxed to confused to a particular shade of pink I'd never seen on a human being before. She looked up at my father. Then at me. Then back at the folder like it might have made a mistake. Roy picked his up, looked inside and put it back down. Picked it up again. Put it down. Gerald. My father, the man with the speech and the radio voice and the $900 wine, opened his and stared at it for a long moment. His bill included his entree, his share of the appetizers he'd ordered before I arrived, and the majority of that bottle. I watched him do the math in real time. It wasn't pretty. He looked at me. "Darlene, what is this?" I said perfectly pleasantly, "Your bill, Dad." "There must be a mistake." "You said." "I didn't say anything," I told him. "You said I was paying." "I didn't agree to that." The table was so quiet you could hear the restaurant around us. Other people having normal dinners, laughing, completely unaware that 20 feet away a family was having a long overdue reckoning with basic cause and effect. My mother Patrice looked at me with an expression I can only describe as deeply wounded, which would have worked on me once. "Darlene, we invited you here to reconnect. This is how you treat your family." And here's the thing, that line. "This is how you treat your family." I had heard some version of that sentence my entire life. Every time I had a boundary, every time I said no, every time I asked for basic decency, somehow I was the one treating the family badly. I took a breath. "Mom," I said quietly, "you invited me to a private dinner and showed up with 20 people. Dad announced in front of everyone that I was paying before I sat down. I hadn't agreed to that. I'm happy to pay for my chicken and my water, which I will, but I'm not paying for a party I didn't plan and wasn't warned about. That's not me being disrespectful. That's me having a spine for the first time in a long time." Silence. Reese, who had apparently decided outside was no longer where she needed to be, walked into the restaurant at that exact moment, spotted our table and slid into the empty chair beside me like she'd been invited. She looked around at the frozen faces, the open bill folders, my father's expression. She looked at me and said, "Did I miss it?" "Just the best part," I said. People started quietly pulling out their wallets. Some were gracious about it. Some were not. Uncle Roy flagged down Theo and tried to dispute 3 items on his bill, which, "Sir, you ate the steak, I watched you," but Theo handled it with more patience than I ever could have. My father paid his bill without another word to me, which honestly hurt more than the anger would have. My mother cried in the parking lot, which my Aunt Ruthan later texted me was very upsetting for everyone. I texted back that I hoped they'd had a nice meal. I want to be clear, I didn't feel triumphant walking to my car that night. I felt tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones, not your body. Because here's the thing about finally standing up for yourself with family. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like grief. You're not just responding to one dinner. You're responding to 34 years of being the person who absorbs everything so everyone else stays comfortable. Reese walked me to my car and didn't say a single word, which is exactly what I needed. A week passed. Then Gerald called. I let it ring. Twice. Third time I picked up. He didn't use the radio voice this time. He sounded older, somehow quieter. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said." I waited. He said, I think I've been unfair to you for a long time. Not just that night. Another pause. I don't really know how to do this, Darlene. Apologizing. Your grandfather wasn't. We didn't do that in our house. I know that. I've always known that. Knowing why someone hurts you doesn't erase the hurt, but it does make room for something else sometimes. We talked for 40 minutes. It wasn't perfect. He didn't say everything I needed to hear. But he said enough that I could tell it was real. No, but at the end, no pivot to what I should have done differently. Just a man in his late 60s realizing, perhaps a little late, that love without respect isn't actually love. My mother and I have a longer road. She called 2 weeks after Gerald did, and the conversation was harder, shorter, and ended with her saying she needed more time. I told her I understood. I do understand. Understanding doesn't mean waiting forever, but I can give her some time. The 20 relatives? Most of them haven't called. A few did. My cousin on my mother's side, a woman named Beverly, sent me a long text that basically said, I saw what was happening and I should have said something years ago. That one meant something to me. Ruth then has not reached out. Uncle Roy sent a one-sentence email asking if I was satisfied now. I didn't respond. Some people don't change, and at some point you stop auditioning for a role in their growth story. Here's what I want to leave you with, because this is the part that matters. I spent most of my life believing that keeping peace with my family was the same thing as being loved by them. It isn't. Peace that requires one person to silently absorb everything while everyone else takes freely. That's not peace. That's just a very quiet kind of harm. The dinner at Harrow and Stone didn't fix my family. But it was the first time in my life I sat at their table as myself. Not as the person who comes through, not as the safety net, not as Darlene who will handle it. Just me. With my $34 chicken and my glass of water. And I paid my bill, tipped Theo 30% and walked out.